You've probably seen the movie, right? Well, that blockbuster horror hit is actually based on a real family's decade-long nightmare. So today, we're going to dive into the true story of the Perron family and the farmhouse that just wouldn't let them go. And this single line from one of the daughters who actually lived through it all, it just perfectly sets the scene. We're not just talking about a house with a ghost. We're talking about a house that felt, well, alive. All right, so let's set the scene. It's January 1971. The Perron family, that's Roger, Carolyn, and their 5 daughters, are looking for a nice, quiet country life. And they think they've found it in this big, sprawling 14-room farmhouse in Harrisville, Rhode Island. Yep, it was old, maybe a little rundown, but it was supposed to be their peaceful escape. But yeah, that whole peaceful escape thing, it was the last thing they found. The strange stuff didn't even wait to build up slowly. It started almost the second they moved in. From day one, the house made it very clear they weren't alone. It all kicked off with these small, kind of weird things. Carolyn Perron would clean the kitchen floor, turn around, and boom, a fresh pile of dirt right in the middle of the room. A broom she was literally just using would just vanish. At first, she thought it was her 5 kids messing around. But it quickly became obvious these were not childish pranks. Soon, it escalated from whispers and footsteps to doors just opening all by themselves. Something was very, very wrong. So as these events got more and more frightening and a lot more personal, Carolyn started doing some digging into the property's history. She had this sinking feeling that she hadn't just bought a house. She'd inherited some kind of dark, tragic legacy. And what she found was, wow, the house had been in one family, the Arnold family, for 8 generations, and their history was just one tragedy after another. Unexplained deaths, people drowning in the creek, suicides up in the attic, weird sudden illnesses that killed people. It was like the land itself was cursed, just absorbing all of that pain and trauma. And at the very center of all the local spooky stories was one name, Bathsheba Sherman. Now, she was a real person who lived on a farm next door back in the 1800s, and while the movie definitely exaggerates things, the real local legend was already pretty chilling. She was accused of being a Satanist, and the most awful rumor claimed she'd sacrificed a baby by driving a sewing needle into its skull. Now, she was never convicted, but in the court of public opinion, she was guilty. So the legend goes, Bathsheba's spirit stuck around, and she was incredibly territorial. She had apparently vowed that no other woman would ever take her place as the mistress of the house. And when Carolyn Perron moved in, well, she unknowingly became the #1 target of that century-old rage. But here's where it gets even weirder. The Perrons quickly figured out that Bathsheba wasn't the only spirit hanging around. They weren't just being haunted. It felt more like they were in a bizarre house share with the dead, a place that had its own little society of ghosts. And there was a huge difference between the spirits. Some were, well, benign, almost friendly. The daughters talked about these transparent neighbors, one that smelled like flowers, and even a playful little ghost boy. But then there was the other entity, the malevolent one. This one brought with it sudden cold, disgusting smells, and just this deep, overwhelming feeling of dread. And all of its hostility was aimed right at Carolyn. All of this activity was really concentrated in 2 main spots. First, the attic, where a suicide had happened. It just had this heavy, oppressive energy, so bad that the kids refused to go up there by themselves. And then there was the basement. Roger Perron said there was this constant, icy presence down there with a foul smell that felt like it was breathing down his neck every single time he had to go fix the heating system, which, by the way, was always breaking. And this is where the legend about Bathsheba and the terrifying reality for Carolyn just collided. She started getting physically attacked, scratches, bruises, and once she described this exact feeling, a hot needle piercing her skin. It was a horrifying echo of the exact rumor that had haunted Bathsheba Sherman's name for over 100 years. So, completely desperate and terrified, the Perrons made a call that would eventually make their story world famous. They reached out to Ed and Lorraine Warren, the renowned paranormal investigators. They were hoping for a solution, but instead, things were about to get so much worse. The moment she arrived, Lorraine Warren, who was a clairvoyant, confirmed all their worst fears.
She said the house had one of the highest levels of paranormal activity they had ever encountered. She didn't just sense one ghost, she sensed a whole chorus of spirits, all buried in despair, with Bathsheba being the strongest and the most dangerous. The Warrens decided the only way to deal with the thing tormenting Carolyn was to confront it head-on. Lorraine planned to hold a séance right there in the house. It was this massive gamble that was supposed to bring peace, but it ended up unleashing total chaos.
Andrea Perron, one of the daughters, was secretly watching the whole thing unfold, and what she saw that night would traumatize her for the rest of her life. As Lorraine started the séance, her mother, Carolyn, suddenly went rigid, her voice changed, twisted into something guttural. A language that was not human started pouring out of her mouth. And then the impossible happened. According to Andrea, her mother's chair literally lifted up off the ground, and then she was thrown, violently, across the room by a force nobody could see. Andrea honestly thought she was watching her mother die. The whole intervention was a spectacular failure. Roger Perron, panicked and just furious, threw the Warrens out of the house. He was convinced their séance hadn't closed any doors. It had just ripped one wide open. The family was now completely on their own, and more terrified than ever before. So after that disastrous séance, the parents had to make a really difficult choice. They just stopped fighting it. They decided they would simply try to survive. They ended up coexisting with all those spirits for nearly a decade. They were trapped, plain and simple. After what happened with the séance, there was no way they were calling for outside help again. But they also couldn't afford to move. So for years, the hauntings just became this horrifying, unpredictable part of their daily routine, until they finally scraped together enough money to get out of there in 1980. And here's the wildest part. The second their car pulled away from that farmhouse for the very last time, it was over. The voices, the attacks, the footsteps, everything just stopped. It really makes you think about the nature of hauntings, right? This wasn't a ghost attached to a person. It was attached to a place. The trauma was literally in the land. They escaped, but the darkness remained. An inseparable part of that property, just waiting for the next family to come along. Which really leaves us with this final thought. The Perron family's story suggests that some places are more than just wood and nails. They're like containers for history, for tragedy, and maybe for something truly malevolent. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? If a house can hold on to memories, can land hold on to a curse?